let's just face it. Part of our society or part of our makeup as a society or as a community is in such a way that we value so much, we put a lot of worth on what we do than who we are. That is why we are so obsessed with titles and with functions. And in equal measure, most people who do not have titles tend to feel worthless. Sometimes a crisis normally gets rid of our titles. A divorce makes a married woman single or divorced. That's a title. A retrenchment makes a worker jobless. That's a title. Death of a parent makes a child fatherless or motherless or an orphan. That's a title. Loss of an investment makes an investor bankrupt or poor or struggling. That's another title. Loss of a house makes a family homeless, and so on and so forth. These new titles that adversity normally gives us almost always espouse our ultimate fears. We need not accept these new titles. And today in the podcast, I want us to answer this question. What is the best answer to this question? So, what do you do? Especially when you're in a crisis. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Life Signatures podcast with Lawrence Namale. Lawrence is a life coach, author, and keynote speaker who loves to tackle different topics on purpose, productivity, and resilience. His mission in life is to awaken all your boundless possibilities available in you. Life Signatures podcast is dedicated to bring to reality every single person who knows that deep down in their gut, there's got to be more to life than this. And now, here is your host, Lawrence Namale.
We've already seen in the previous podcast, one of the previous podcasts, that when someone tells you that you do not have a second opportunity to introduce yourself or to make a first impression, they are telling you half the truth. Let's face it, every time we encounter someone new or in a relationship that is new or that is developing, there is always that interest that we have in what they do, and the same measure they have an interest in what we do. And we tend to want to know how we are making things happen in life by defining people with their titles. So we give respect to engineers, we give respect to doctors, we give respect to lawyers, we give respect to politicians, give respect to business people, entrepreneurs, and so on and so forth. And in the same measure, we tend to look down on other people and other titles. Perhaps the most undervalued title on the face of the earth across the world is the title of a teacher. But I do not want to talk about that. Maybe I'll cover that in another episode. Today's episode, I want us to discuss, what do you do? What answer do you give to someone who asks you this question? So, what do you do? And you know that question normally elicits so much disturbance in very many people, especially if there is nothing that you are doing with your life at a moment in time. Especially if your title is quote-unquote jobless and you've sanctified it, you've accepted it inside of your spirit and inside of your heart that you are indeed jobless. And maybe another title that a crisis has given you, divorced, a title that a crisis has given you. Some people will label you sinner, okay? Some people will label you bankrupt, some people will label you whatever it is. But the question is, how are you going to accept that title inside of your spirit, inside of your heart? Because whatever title that you do accept, whatever title that you peddle in your spirit, in your heart, no matter how glorified someone else might think you are, it is the title that you've accepted inside of your heart, inside of your spirit, that at the end of the day is going to carry the day. A few years back, I remember I got a ride in a neighbor's car. I was living in a foreign country, and I got a ride in a neighbor's car, and being strangers, we hadn't introduced ourselves one to another. We needed to do that, and so the conversation was normal about our workplaces, about our spouses, about our kids, about our nationalities and the like. And however, when I go to the office, I was very unhappy with myself. I was unhappy because I had not entrusted this new neighbor with the product that I was working on at work. Neither had I made an impression upon them to get a copy of a book that I was working on, an upcoming book which I have already published. Turn your setbacks into major comebacks. I was unhappy because it would have taken long for me to craft a speech that would capture my neighbor's interest. I wasn't ready for that. Of course, they did not ask me, so what do you do, and so on. I was, however, happy with myself for one thing, because I volunteered information. I was speaking so eloquently and so passionately about who I am. I talked about life signatures. I talked about what I value most in life. I talked about my persistence, my consistency. I talked about my vision, about people, about valuing the life of purpose and seeing that people deploy their potential and people come to the level of their fullness of their glory. I was happy because that information just flowed freely from me. Then I realized how easy it was to add value in the lives of people by simply telling them not what we do, but who we are. Who we are probably is going to give back to what we do, and next time my neighbor's company is going to be in the need of someone who can speak things about purpose, speak things about potential, probably they are going to look for me. I wasn't looking for them to, get inside of their hearts, inside of their minds that I want a job, or I want a contract, or I want a gig from their company, but I just spoke. But it dawned on me that the passion I used to communicate, the things that espouse my life, will be able to convert this person next time they have an impression, next time they think, or next time they hear of someone in need of whatever I talked about. They will not think further than me because of the way I introduce myself. But let me tell you this. One of the most dreaded questions that you can ask someone, especially the someone who is in a crisis, is this question: what do you do? Perhaps you've had that question asked to you before, and it dawned on you. You know what you did? Perhaps you gave excuses. You made excuses, you made explanations, you made reasons as to why you do not do some X, Y, Z, because maybe you are not employed and so on. If you are in a crisis, your definition or your makeup is totally different from someone who is making things happen. Even if they are not doing something constructive, they will just say, I'm with these guys, I'm with those guys, and so on. But it's the most dreaded question to ask someone, especially if they're going through something. What do you do? See, we live in a society that apportions our worth on what we do than who we are. I'm not saying that we should now be living in denial when someone asks us what we do and we have nothing to answer. I am saying that we need to choose to refuse to let a crisis define who we really are. And I think the definition is not based on the result of a setback, but the definition should be based on the results of what our purpose in life is. And I think we need to come to that level where we are not necessarily answering a question of what do you do, but we need to answer the question of who are you? You need to define who you are, because who you are doesn't change whether there is a crisis or not. Your definition is the sum total of your deepest aspirations as well as your positive contribution to mankind, and you should never forget it. Your definition should not be what you are doing. Your definition should be what you are born to do, what you aspire to do, what you desire to do at the deepest recesses of your heart and of your mind and in your gut, and what contribution that you're going to bring in the earth for mankind. When you assume a victim title, see, a title that has come to you because of something that has happened to you or something that you have done, when you assume a victim title that has come to you as a result of a setback, you kind of self-stigmatize. You self-stigmatize and you kind of shrink from life. And it's easy to recognize this when someone asks you that question, what do you do? When you have no clue of what to answer them, especially when you're in a crisis. Guess what you've done? You have stooped low to accept on value without any argument the definition, the negative definition that a crisis has given you, which should not be the case. The problem is people want to give themselves a definition when they have something to do. When you get employed, guess what? You start flaunting around your job title. I am a secretary, I am a data analyst, I am a manager, I am a trade development representative, I am XYZ. And when you do not have something that you're doing, guess what? You call yourself something else, which is negative, which is totally wrong. I believe that you should not be defined by what you do. And of course, later on in this podcast, I'm going to talk about the importance of work in relation to our identities. But you need to come to the level where you sit down and you craft who you are in relation to what your purpose in life is, in relation to what you espouse to be your highest contributions on the face of the earth. And then you start defining yourself that way. Even if you're not doing it at the moment, you will say, my vision is XYZ. I really desire, or I really aspire. You use such like words. I aspire to bring a change in the lives of widows. I aspire to make a change in the lives of school-going children in the area of transportation. I aspire, or I desire, to make a contribution on the face of the earth in the area of people's potential, people's purpose. You speak those things that are not as though they are. You don't give excuses even when you do not have the wherewithal to do whatever it is that you feel you're supposed to be doing. You need to keep reaffirming. You need to keep reaffirming who you really are instead of reaffirming what the world thinks of you. You keep reaffirming what the world has dealt with you. When it deals with you a blow and gives you a negative connotation, a negative title, do not reaffirm that. What you need to do is to go back to your own definition. So, how best do we answer this question? How do we answer this question? What do you do? I think I'm going to give us some pointers even as I come to a close of this podcast today. There are 4 things that I think you should know and you should communicate to yourself before you can communicate to other people. Number 1, I have already talked about this. Document your greatest aspirations. You see, I know you have an aspiration. I know there is no one on the face of the earth that doesn't have an aspiration. There is no one who doesn't aspire for anything. We all have aspirations, and the question is, have you documented those aspirations? Mostly it has to do with either the change you want to make in the world or the difference you're bringing to it. This statement is as a result of documenting my greatest aspirations. Listen to this. I see myself guiding people in living legacies in this life because I believe that is one of the ultimate reasons for existence. If someone asks me that question, and even if I don't have a job, and I tell them that, what kind of aspiration, what kind of impact do you think is going to cause in that person's spirit, in that person's heart? Are you getting my point? I see myself guiding people in living legacies in this life because I believe that is one of the most ultimate things for ultimate reasons for the reason of existence of man. When I say that, there is some wind, there is some spirit, there is some weight in those words, other than saying at the moment I'm in between jobs. See, so number one, document your aspirations, because you do have an aspiration, whether you have a job or not. And think, number two, you need to document who your audience is. And I've talked about this in a previous episode. The whole world might not necessarily be your audience, depending, of course, on your aspirations that you've already documented. Your audience might be your children, your audience might be your spouse, it might be married men, might be married women, might be singles, might be parents, might be business executives, might be the illiterate, might be the poor people, might be the people who are suffering in hospital, and so on. Make sure you narrow down to an audience. Take some time with this, because it is absolutely important. It's something that is seldom done by people, so that when someone asks you what you do next time, guess what? You have an audience in mind and you have aspirations in mind. Number three, you just merge the two statements. What you found out in point number one, what your aspirations are, and what you found out in point number two, what your audience is. Your statement must not necessarily be a business pitch. It just has to be conversational. What that statement does is that it communicates your passion for a particular area or a particular aspiration, and it also communicates the audience to which your aspiration is targeting. I will not be surprised if your audience will have some questions and more questions to ask you, follow-up questions to ask you once you've introduced yourself that way. So we must not forget, however, that who we are is not just about what we do. Who we are has to do with whose we are, where we are from, how well we are serving the infinite intentions of our lives. And then the fourth thing that you need to do is to rehearse. Number three, we seldom do this, and let me just speak for myself. I have not been doing this intentional because I've been thinking that it is not important. But you see, nothing can be farther from the truth. This is one of those things that I spoke about, I think, in episode number 97, when I talked about the greatest speech ever. This is something that you can do on a daily basis, speaking and rehearsing who you really are. Once you've merged statement number one and statement number two, you make this a daily thing that you're speaking to yourself, so that next time you are in the presence of someone and they're asking you, so what do? You give them that statement that has your deepest aspiration, deepest contribution, even if you are not doing it at the moment. And it also has the audience that you are targeting. That person is going to be interested in your conversation, other than when you say things like, I'm in between jobs, I am jobless, I used to do this, I used to do that. It is very disempowering, very disenchanting, very disconnecting, very uncomfortable. And I'm not saying that we run away from reality necessarily. I am saying that we deliberately, intentionally find a more creative, more engaging, more connecting, more conversational way of answering that question, what do you do, when you speak about your aspirations. And I'm not saying that we go around and just look for things that we're going to paste around like we're doing on LinkedIn when we put very many titles and so on and so forth. No, I'm saying let us go down to what we really aspire to do in this life. Find out what it is and sit down and create that conversational response. Your aspirations, deepest of them, your contributions, and your audience. Connect what you aspire to do for them and contribute to them. And then rehearse this over and over and over again. As you do this, next time someone asks you, so what do you do? And you give them that statement, I guarantee you, chances are that their imagination is going to be pricked. Chances are that they're going to ask you follow-up questions. Chances are that you might be in the presence of someone who wants to invest in the very thing that you want to do. Instead of telling them, I am looking for a job, I am in between jobs. Believe me, at the end of the day, they are going to find out that you are jobless, but they have found out in a positive way. So, I hope that makes sense to you today. When someone asks you, so what do you do? Tell them not that you're jobless, but tell them about your aspirations at the deepest recesses of your heart. Thank you for listening. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Life Signatures Radio. If you enjoyed today's show, subscribe to Life Signatures Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, or visit our website at lifesignatures.libsyn.com. Life Signatures Radio, fresh, clean, and inspiring.